What is up, people? Van from the VaniverseGaming channel here, giving my first impressions on Remnant 2. Now, I know a lot of people have already played it. There's tons of videos out, there's tons of reviews, and this usually happens when a game first releases. But hopefully you're here watching my video because you like my perspective on it. And I have played like 500 hours of Remnant from the Ashes, so I feel like I have a pretty good idea if this is a good game for people who've played Remnant before, or if it's not. Now, for all of you who have never played Remnant before, first, shame on you. Go play it. It's great, and you should probably play it before you play Remnant 2, because you play Remnant 2 first and go back and play the first one, you might be disappointed because they do a pretty good job of making some of the things that weren't great in the first one better in Remnant 2. Overall, it's still an amazing game. So I'm going to give you my first impressions. I'm going to try and compare the first game and this game to kind of give you some context of why I have these impressions. And then later on, I'll give you my full review of the game. I just really have scratched the surface and only beaten the campaign, which is why we're doing a first impression. So with all that out of the way, let's get started. Now, when you start this game off, it's very similar to the first one where you start off in character creation. It has an okay character creation system. There's a lot of options for scars and colorations and hair and girl, boy, whatever, voices. It's not great, but it's not terrible. And right out of the gate, you can see graphically this is a very well done game. It's probably on Unreal Engine 5. I'm really not that technical. The first one wasn't nearly as graphically, appealing, but that was the first thing that caught my eye. When you enter into the game, very similar to the first one, you're kind of walking through the city looking for Ward 13. In this one, you actually have an NPC as a companion. In the first one, you just kind of hit a dock, you came off, and you went right into the tutorial. So both these start with character creation and head you into the tutorial. The one thing that this one does well is that in the tutorial, you actually fight a boss, so you can kind of get all the mechanics and all the aspects of the game, where in the first one, you don't get everything right away. The other thing to note about Remnant 2 versus Remnant 1 is they added in verticality to the game. And so now even their mini-map was changed so that you can see the verticality of the different maps, which I thought was A, pretty cool, and B, I like how they updated the mini-map to help out. Now, because of the verticality, you can actually jump. You can't jump like normally, but you can run towards ledges and try and do your jump, and you can grab onto the ledge or jump over things, which has made exploration even more fun. Once you get into the tutorial, you'll notice that they actually show you what the game is like to play with a group of 4. And so you end up fighting the boss in the tutorial with a party of NPCs, or with your whole party if you join the game after the tutorial. So once you get through with a party of NPCs, during the tutorial, you can't join with any of your friends. You got to do it with the NPCs. You make your way to Ward 13. Very similar to Remnant 1. Now, the cool part about this is once you're in Ward 13, you kind of explore. If you've played the first game, a lot of the characters are what were in the first game, and so it's pretty cool to see them now in a much better fashion, but they all have the same personalities. When you start this out, you're going to choose your archetype. In the first game, we had archetypes, but they were based on the gear you had. So the scrapper archetype was 100% based on heavy armor. You had a shotgun. The mod that you were given and the trait you were given is what defined you as a scrapper. In this game, your archetype now has skills tied to it. Your archetype also levels up. So if you choose champion or medic, you then unlock specific traits, specific perks, and a specific skill for that archetype. But don't fret, because when you actually play, whatever archetype you pick in the game to start does not have to be your primary archetype for the whole game. You can swap it out. So that's really cool, and we'll get into that here later. So once you pick your archetype, then you will go through the standard tutorial, and you will finish it up by opening the stone, the ward stone, to then teleport you to the different worlds. Now, if you've played Remnant 1, you always started in Earth, and that is where you started to go every single playthrough. You had to go through Earth and get to the labyrinth. In Remnant 2, they actually randomized your starting zone, so you're still completing the story mode, but you now can start in one of the different zones. It's not always Earth, and you don't always have to proceed. I really like this change because I made 5 different characters, all different archetypes to start the game, and most of the time I started in a different world, which I thought was pretty cool. Once you progress through that world and unlock it, you then head to the labyrinth just like you do in the first game. The key, though, is the worlds are much, much bigger. In Remnant 1, when you would run through a world, there was maybe 1 or 2 dungeon paths, and then you had the world boss. So in any given run, you were either going to do 1 or 2 different events, or 1 or 2 different, dungeon bosses, and then you would kill the world boss. In this version, the map is huge. When you look at the map, when you click on the stone and view the different maps, they even show you how big these maps are, and they do a good job of putting question marks in the areas that you haven't fully explored. And so the time it takes to explore everything on each of the different worlds is drastically increased from Remnant 1, and that's exactly what I was looking for. Remnant 1 felt like you zipped through everything, and then you just kept re-rolling to get all the different events, and then once you kind of did that, it was done, and it didn't take a lot of time to achieve that. In Remnant 2, it has taken me close to 25 hours to unlock every single piece of every single zone in the campaign mode, and in addition to that, they made the labyrinth its own little world with its own little events and bosses and fighting, which is a huge upgrade from Remnant 1. Now, once you progress into the first world, you beat that, you beat the world boss, you move into the next one. The cool thing about this is as you're leveling up your archetype, there's vendors in town that will sell you a pin. This pin is the archetype that is tied to it. And if you take it to the same gentleman who upgrades your Dragonstone and who gives you the ability to reset your trait points, who I won't share for spoiler, he will also convert your pin into another class. And you have the ability to run with a primary class and a secondary class. This is a really cool change, and what makes it even better is you are not stuck. So let's just say you have the Challenger class at level 5, and now you get your pin for the Medic. So now you have the Medic class as your subclass. You could switch those and put your Champion in your secondary and put your Medic in your primary. And the main difference is each archetype or class gets a very specific ability. And you only can use that specific ability if it's in your primary slot. If it's in your secondary slot, you don't get that main ability. So for example, the Challenger's main ability is that if he dies, he comes back to life once every 10 minutes or every time he clicks a wardstone. So if I put that in my secondary slot, I wouldn't get that. That's a really cool thing that you can swap them. You still retain perks and traits. You just don't get that primary ability. So you can unlock all the different archetypes in the game, and then you can put them in your primary, secondary, and you can build some really cool class combinations that I think is just going to make the playthrough and the replayability better than in Remnant 1. Remnant 1 was all about your gear and doing the different gear sets to build out your class. In this, it's all about combining the different classes together plus the gear together to give you that ultimate build that you want to try and play through. The other thing that I've noticed in first impressions is the gameplay is very much like Remnant 1. It's fast-paced, there's a different strategy for everything, but they definitely have increased the amount of monsters that are in each zone. So between wardstones, very similar to Dark Souls, when you click on a wardstone, that's how you get all your resources back. But by doing so, you respawn the entire zone. So the distance between wardstones is much greater because the maps are bigger, and the amount of trash mobs are larger. And so I feel like it's more challenging than it was in the beginning or in Remnant 1 because you got to kill a lot more stuff and survive a lot longer before you get into the different wardstones. In addition, the maps have a good job of being so vast that there's a lot of secret nooks and crannies. There's a lot of things about them that make exploring them fun. And a lot of the different variety is there that wasn't really in Remnant 1. Like I said, in Remnant 1, you might have had 2 little dungeons. In this, you might have 5 or 6 different dungeons and a world boss. So I really like what they've done. Now, once you get used to that, you got to get used to the combat. The combat has changed drastically because now you have a skill to utilize. You still have mods you can put on your weapons. and then you still have the Dragonstone. But now they've changed it to where you can swap your Dragonstone out for other Dragonstones, and then you can modify those Dragonstones. In addition, there still are items that help with some of the different negative effects you can get on your character, but I have noticed that they don't drop very often. Most of it has to be purchased in town, and that was kind of different than what I've seen before. The other thing that I've also noticed is all the currency in the game is exactly the same as the first one. You still need luminite crystals from boss mobs or mini boss mobs or elites, whatever you want to call them, in order to upgrade some of your weapons, to upgrade your archetype, and to do some things like that. You can still gather simulacrums to upgrade your Dragonstone use, but if you play Dark Souls, it's basically your heal that you can use, and depending on how many charges it has is how many times you can use it before you have to reset. The other thing that is a little bit different is in the first one, your gear score was based on all of your gear together. It seemed like your weapons were the main thing, but you had different armor sets that had different things that they did. In Remnant 2, it looks like your armor sets do not have a gear score, so they don't really contribute to needing to be leveled up. And so that's pretty cool, where the only things you really have to upgrade are your weapons, and pretty much that is it. Now, your character level is your challenger rating, or whatever we want to call it, is based, I think, on several different factors, where in the first one it was mainly based on the amount of times you upgraded your weapons. So it's a very similar system where your character has a challenge level, whatever that is, 8, 9, and it looks to be it's from a contribution of traits, and your character level, like your different archetype levels that lead to that, not just your guns. Like upgrading guns seems to be very similar in the first one, where it really doesn't matter. So once you kind of get the feel of playing through the different worlds and playing through the labyrinths and unlocking the different armors and fighting the different beasts, you get to the end of the campaign and you have to start back over. Every time you beat a world, you unlock adventure mode for that world. But ultimately, they've taken what we had with Remnant 1 and they just made it even better. It's almost the exact same story with the exact same narrative. So if you're looking for a game with a good story and narrative, you're not going to get this. It's just basically you show up, the founder disappears, and so does some other NPC, and your job is to go find them, and that leads on. There's a lot of lore in all the different worlds that kind of build out the story. But similar to Remnant 1, the main story is not the appeal of the game. It's just a reason to get you to run through the campaign the first time. And then after you do that, you're going to be re-rolling adventure mode, because really the fun of the game is the combat, the finding the different gear, fighting different bosses, checking out different world events, and ultimately building out a character combination of the different archetypes and just leaning into that to just make it more fun. So that was a lot, but I want to give you a summary of my overall first impressions of Remnant 2. If you're coming into Remnant 2 without playing Remnant 1, you might be disappointed, because a lot of people, this is not a first-person shooter, it's a third-person, and some of the controls are a little off. The graphics are on point, but you might be kind of annoyed by some of the different concepts if you've never played even a Dark Souls game. So just keep that in mind. If you're coming for a really good story, like, a Mass Effect or some of those other games, this is not really the game for you. This game is 100% based on kind of like a Borderlands, where it's a looter shooter. Your whole purpose is to kill bosses, solve dungeon events, get your gear, level up your traits, and build out this class combination that just makes it super fun. And then when you're done, level up some other archetypes and try a new build, and just keep redoing that over and over again and playing with your friends. So ultimately, from my first impression, I love this game. It was just a plus to what Remnant 1 was. And if you're a Remnant 1 player, you're going to love Remnant 2. If you're not, it might not be the game for you. I think these styles of games are a very specific type of person, and they might not be the best fit. But I would recommend playing Remnant 1 first, pay a cheaper price, and if you love that, then come and buy Remnant 2, and I think you won't be disappointed. If you don't like Remnant 1, I probably wouldn't pick up Remnant 2, because it just takes Remnant 1 and just makes it better. So hopefully you guys like this first impression video. If you haven't played Remnant 1, I have a lot of videos on that on my channel. I can also, send you a link to the actual review I did on Remnant 1 as well. But ultimately, it's probably a good idea to play that before you play Remnant 2. Thanks again for watching this video. Hopefully it's helpful. Please stay tuned for my full review and all my other videos I'm going to have on Remnant 2. Mine will stand the test of time, where all these other YouTubers will come. They'll just spit out content and they'll go to the next game. I'll give you lots of content on Remnant 2 for time to come. And then we'll switch over to Baldur's Gate 3 most likely. This is Van from the VaniverseGaming channel. Cheers and peace out.